الحمد لله الذي علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان والصلاة والسلام على خير الأنام نبينا وسيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. صلوا على رسول الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد صلاة تفتح لنا أبواب الرضا والتيسير وتغلق بها عنا أبواب الشر والتعسير. أنت مولانا فنعم المولى ونعم النصير. اللهم اجعلنا من أهل القرآن الذين هم أهلك وخاصتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم اجعل القرآن ربيع قلوبنا ونور صدورنا وجلاء أحزاننا وذهاب همومنا وغمومنا. اللهم نور قلوبنا بالقرآن. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we're covering Surat Al-Insan. You're with us in the group. Surat Al-Insan. We're covering Surat Al-Insan. Okay? We finished Surat Al-Saf, okay? So we're, as we do always, going into an intro of the surah. This surah, it answers questions no philosophers in the past could have solved, no thinkers, no scientists, no scholars. Throughout history, there was always a question that made them think, that made them reflect. These questions are, why were we created as insan? What is the purpose of insan's life? Why are you here in this world? What is creation and how does it relate to insan? And what is the purpose of it for insan? Why are you here? Why am I here? All of these philosophers and thinkers and scholars of the past, they have tried and tried and tried, all of them, to answer this question. And the more they researched this issue and the more they looked into it, the more it led them down more and more confusion. Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, all of them. All, even modern philosophers, modern thinkers, Einstein himself, people, they look up to him. He called this world a mystery. To a Muslim, is this world a mystery? MashaAllah, if he's so intelligent, he couldn't figure this out. So you see, this surah is the answer to all of these questions that come to their mind that they're not able to solve. Why were you, ya insan, created? They were never able to answer this. They will never be able to answer this because this answer requires divine guidance from who? Allah Azza wa Jal. So in less than 2 pages, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers for us a question that hundreds and thousands of scholars put together would not be able to solve. Allah answers it for you in less than 2 pages. You all know Shaykh Hamza Yusuf? Shaykh Hamza Yusuf, may Allah protect him. He said something very, very powerful. He said, of course he has a liberal arts college and he deals in philosophy, logic and all of these things. This is his main takhassus outside of Maliki fiqh and whatnot. And so he mentions that all of the prophets, alayhimu salatu wasalam, from the time of Adam alayhi salam, all the way, thousands of years till the last prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Thousands of years. Did they meet? Of course, we know as Muslims, Isra wal Mi'raj, okay? The disbelievers, they don't believe in this. But despite all of this long time between them, they never disagreed about the foundations of faith. How is this possible? How is it that when it comes to aqeedah and when it comes to these foundational beliefs of a Muslim, all of the prophets, from the beginning of Adam all the way to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they all agreed on the message. But philosophers, even if they are a teacher-student relationship, teacher-student, like Socrates and Plato and they themselves, imagine teacher and student, they don't even agree why we're here in this world. A simple question as to why, this main question, Anta limadha huna, why are you here? Even teacher and student amongst the philosophers could not agree. And that is why when a person studies different philosophies, you see that there's so many opinions and so many thoughts that these people have. Some of which we even see in children's cartoons planted through characters. These are subconscious messages that they give to sometimes children. So you have to be very careful what your children are watching and what you're watching. For example, nihilism. This is very common now. This life has no value. It has no purpose. Anta huna. Nihilism. Many people, they have this philosophy. Or for example, hedonism, where your only goal of life is to have as much fun and as much pleasure, and the only goal is happiness. It's only self-indulgence, shahwat, desires, anything that pleases that, this is my philosophy. A lot of people, they don't have this philosophy. Some people, naturalism, the list goes on and on and on of all the different ajib philosophies that they can have. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't make you and I go through this whole process. وَمَا خَلَقَتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. This surah, from the virtues of this surah, every single week, Salat al-Fajr on the day of Jumu'ah, you're supposed to read this surah along with Surat As-Sajda. This is reported, a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, where the Prophet ﷺ, Abu Hurairah narrates that the Prophet ﷺ, he would read in the first raka'ah of Fajr, Alif Lam Mim Sajda, Surah As-Sajda, and in the second raka'ah he would read with Hal Ata Al-Insan, Surah Al-Insan. Why is this? What is the benefit from knowing this hadith? Why every Jumu'ah? The answer to this question, why we read it every week on day of Jumu'ah, will clarify the major themes of this surah. The story of Insan, why was he created, where is he going, and what is he, Insan, expected to do. Allah is reminding us of your goals and in this life, your purpose in this life every single week, so that you don't forget why you are here. Why are you here? This surah is the story of Insan. Qissatul Insan. When was this surah revealed? This surah was revealed from amongst the early Meccan surahs. If you look at the ayat itself and you look at the theme itself, it's very clear that this is from amongst the early Meccan surahs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a lot of patience in the surah. وَجَزَاهُمْ بِمَا صَبَرُوا فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum in the early Meccan period, how much trials did they have to go through? Torture, trials, this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them to be patient. فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ وَلَا تُطِعْ مِنْهُمْ آثِمًا أَوْ كَفُورًا. Don't listen to them. They're telling the Prophet ﷺ, you follow our religion one day, we follow yours one day. You do this for us, we do this for us. Any of our women you want, we'll do it for you. وَلَا تُطِعْ مِنْهُمْ آثِمًا أَوْ كَفُورًا. In a time where they are tested and tried, and they're reminded of this test and trial, this is why you're here. نَبْتَلِيهِ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ. You're here for enjoyment, or are you here as a test? نَبْتَلِيهِ فَجَعَلْنَاهُ سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. A time of test and trial and hunger that the Sahaba faced, despite that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about them, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ. That even at a time when they absolutely need it, يَسْتَعْلُونَ عَلَى الْحُبِّ وَيُنْفِقُونَ. عَلَى حُبِّهِ. They need the food, and despite that they're still giving. إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ. This surah is one of the longest surahs that talks about the reward of the people of Jannah. And it's only 2 pages. Only 2 pages, and it's one of the longest descriptions of the bliss and the reward of the people of Jannah. Why? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is here telling the Sahaba, encouraging them of this incredible reward that is awaiting them. 14 ayahs talking about the reward of the people of Jannah. How many ayahs are in this surah? Dr. Awad, how many ayahs in this surah? 31? 30? 14 of them are about the reward of Jannah. 14, half the surah is about Jannah. Can you imagine in this short surah? And only one of it is about the adhab of kuffar. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even, is there any blazing sun in Jannah? لا يرون فيها شمسا. It's in the surah. But yet there is still shade. Subhanallah. Why is this being told to them? Because look at the example of Bilal radiallahu anh, being put under the hot sun, being burned alive, being put that rock on top of him, ahadun ahad. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them of the reward that they're going to get for the patience that they are showing here in the dunya. So you see, it's very clear that this surah is then when was it revealed? An early Makki surah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you look at ayah number 23, إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ تَنزِيلًا فَاصْبِرْ. The best way to establish patience and thabat and being grounded in your religion is through the Qur'an. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ تَنزِيلًا فَاصْبِرْ. Sayyid Qutb, he mentions also through the bayan of the surah, just looking at the flow and the themes and the meanings of the surah, it's very clear that this is from the early Meccan surah. And this is also reported on Ibn Abbas, Ibn Abi Talha, Qatada, Muqatil, all saying that it's Makkiyah, and it's also the position of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhum jami'an. It's an early Meccan surah. What is the theme of this surah, Surah Al-Insan? In one short phrase or sentence, it is the story of man. The story of insan. In Al-Mukhtasar fi Tafsir, they mention, Mukhtasar fi Tafsir, by the way, is translated. I sent the PDF on Fajr Quran. It's an incredible work. It's very basic, very simple. It explains it in easy language, and in the beginning of each surah, it gives a small intro. So I'll read the intro. تذكير الإنسان بأصله, reminding the human being of his origin. وحكمة خلقه or وحكمة خلقه, the wisdom behind his creation. ومصيره في الدارين, and his destiny in both worlds. وإظهار نعيم الجنة, and what? Showing and displaying the rewards and the bliss of Jannah. تثبيتا للمؤمنين, to give strength to the believers. وَدَعْوَى لِلْكَافِرِينَ, and an invitation to the disbelievers. Insan, where are you going? Where are you coming from? And what are you going to do? You see? So this surah answers this question that no scholar, no philosopher could answer, let it be, except from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to go into more detail, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah, He tells us that insan, he's tested. He's given free choice, freedom, free will. What do you do with it? Imma shakir wa imma. Either you're grateful or you're ungrateful towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Either you believe or you disbelieve in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you were created in this world, nabtalihi, as a test. You were brought to this dunya as a test, not for play, not for fun, not for Nashville Broadway, not for riba, not for haram, not for doing fawahish, not for any of these things. You are brought here, why? As a test. Are you going to be from those that are shakir? You have the choice. Wa imma kafura. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created us to see our actions, shakir or kafura, and then the recompense and the jaza of both of them. And this is where another scholar mentioning in the theme of the surah, الترغيب بطريق الهداية والإيمان والترهيب عن طريق الغي والضلال or الضلال. The encouragement, targhib, towards the path of guidance and iman and faith, and discouragement and warning from the path of misguidance and error. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah, He is telling us that you were created after you were nothing. هل أتى على الإنسان حين. This is a long period. 100,000 years ago, where were you and I? Where was insan? ما في. أنت, you and I, what are we? Nothing. Nothing. هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر. You and I, 30 years ago, I was nobody. 100 years ago, you were nobody? No, nothing. هل أتى على الإنسان حين, a long period you were nothing. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you, created me, and honored us by making us insan, and we were created for a purpose, and this purpose is a test. And then with that test, we are either shakir, which is repeated in this surah, and patient, وَجَزَاهُمْ بِمَا صَبَرُوا, upon the responsibilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts upon us, takalif, and we are afraid. يَوْمًا عَبُوسًا قَمْطَرِيرًا يَوْمًا ثَقِيلًا, we are afraid of that heavy day. And so, or kafura, lost in the pleasures of the dunya, وَيُحِبُّونَ الْعَاجِلَةِ, they just want it now. They just want to enjoy it now. يُحِبُّونَ الْعَاجِلَةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this surah, He tells us of the different things that makes insan, the man, human, weak. لَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْئًا مَذْكُورًا. You were not, who were we 100 years ago? Nothing. Who were we before we were created? Nothing. مِن نُطْفَةٍ أَمْشَاجٍ. How can we be arrogant and we are created from نُطْفَةٍ أَمْشَاجٍ? We're from, A'azzakumullah, you all know how you and I were created. You all know how your children were created. مِن نُطْفَةٍ أَمْشَاجٍ, from this. And no one can run from the qadr of Allah Azza wa Jal. No one can run from the qada of Allah Azza wa Jal. نَبْتَلِيهِ. This dunya is bala. The non-Muslim cannot run away from it. The Muslim cannot run away from it. We are all under the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions points of strength that insan has. He makes him سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. فَجَعَلْنَاهُ سَمِيعًا بَصِيرًا. He gives you hearing. He gives you eyesight. And then He gives you hidayah of irshad. إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلِ. There's hidayah of tawfiq. Alhamdulillah alladhi waffaqana lil iman. Say Ameen. Alhamdulillah, Allah gave us tawfiq of having iman and making us believers. But there's also hidayah of irshad. Don't people have senses? Don't they think? Don't they reflect? Okay? Why is it called Surat Insan? Very simple. Usually it's very tricky sometimes to trying to figure out why the surah is titled that and where the theme is tied to that. Surah Al-Baqarah. Remember we discussed this? How do you tie the themes of Baqarah to Baqarah? It has to do with Banu Israel. قصة تحتاج شرح. Surah Al-Insan. Why is it called Surah Al-Insan? It's the story of Insan. Where is Insan going? Where is he coming from? And what are you supposed to do? Okay, so and also begins with the mention of Insan. هل أتى على الإنسان. So there's a few names of this surah from the time of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. صلوا على رسول الله. They would call this Surah هل أتى على الإنسان or Surah Al-Insan. Okay, the author of Itqan, who is he? We're covering it. Suyuti. Okay, he mentions in the list that he mentions the names of the surah. Dr. Suhaib didn't translate that portion. It's the first part. When he mentions Surah Al-Insan, he doesn't mention it with the surahs, the list of surahs that have multiple names. Yet it does. There are other names that are mentioned for Surah Al-Insan. It's also called Surah Al-Dahr. Surah Al-Dahr in many of the different copies of the Quran. I think the copy also, the Desi copy, it's called Surah Al-Dahr. Okay? And Khafaji, he also called it Surah Al-Amshaj. Min nutfatin amshaj. Amshaj is the zygote, where the egg it then fertilizes. You know, when the female egg meets with the male sperm, the initial phase when they meet, this the zygote. This is nutfatin amshaj, when they meet. This is the only time in the Quran where nutfa is mentioned amshaj. Min nutfatin amshaj. Otherwise, it's always mentioned by itself. Okay, so it's called Suratul Amshaj. Okay, and the last name of it that's mentioned by Tabarsi, he says Suratul Abrar. The surah of the righteous, the abrar, because all the reward and the mention of the na'im al-jannah is mentioned of them. The Quran, is it cut off or is it all connected? All connected. Something very beautiful to do, and this is something to always think about. How is the Quran flowing? How is it connected? When I was teaching the 1 week long program for the qisar surah, the short surahs, remember how we tied every single surah to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, to the next one? How is Surah Al-Insan tied to Surah Al-Qiyamah? Very easy. The surah before, Allah is talking about, you were created from what, insan? أَلَمْ يَكُنْ نُطْفَةً مِّن مَّنِيٍّ يُمْنَى ثُمَّ كَانَ عَلَقَةً فَجَعَلَ مِنْهُ الزَّوْجَيْنِ الذَّكَرَ وَالْأُنثَى. So he's talking about the creation of insan. You were from mani, you were from sperm, and then he mentions it in Surah Al-Insan. And also in that surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَان. Does man really think أَن يُتْرَكَ سُدًى, that he'll just be left alone? أن يترك سدى أن يهمل فلا يؤمر ولا ينهى ولا يعاقب. When you say أسديت الشيء, it means أهملته, you have neglected it. Okay? Do you think that we just created you and then you will just be abandoned? You won't have any commands that you have to take care of. You won't have any prohibitions. You're just going to be left like that? La. Surah Al-Insan then continues that conversation that is there and started in Surah Al-Qiyamah. And it's as though every surah, when you finish it, it leaves you with a question, and the next surah comes with an answer for it. So again, Surah Al-Insan, to summarize, is the story of man. Why was he created? What is he created from? Why is he created? What is he expected to do? And where will he go based on his actions? We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to benefit from the Quran. وصلى اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم. Yeah. Subhanallah.
I had no identification. I had no name.